Take the computer power cable, for example. If you put this up to your ear, sometimes you can hear, sometimes you can't, a certain humming sound. Different resonance frequencies emitted by the atomic structures of the transformers located inside vibrate out into the air, and we can perceive them with our auditory nerve on some level. Not all the time. I have one laptop computer which you can very markedly hear that humming sound, and it's a very high-pitched sound, and it's kind of unnerving. What happens in a situation like that is that it generates certain harmonics which are somewhat compatible to our auditory nerve and are decoded as certain unpleasant sounds by our minds. So, getting back to my original point after going on that little bit of a tangent, to kind of cement certain principles of the universe in your minds regarding how things are structured, God, or the lack thereof, can be explained away as far as the biblical accounts are concerned using those principles. Now, all the principles of the universe are inviolate. Electromagnetic energy always propagates according to very, I guess you could call them strict guidelines. It always exists as an oscillating positive to negative transference of polarity patterns from electric to magnetic fields. They oscillate, or they phase in and out of what we call the third dimension, and in oscillating between those polarities generate in our field of sight what is known as a ray of light, or a beam of light, or a photon. Now, that in and of itself might be considered a packet of energy, but it is still that energy. The same thing exists in a much more expanded state with ourselves. Now, those principles, in being in motion at all given points in what we call time, therefore, the existence of such a personal being as God is a very tricky thing to decode in the minds of a lot of people, so I will attempt to do it as best I can. Basically, if God were a being that exists like us, he would have a limited physical form. He therefore would not be able to be all-powerful and still be able to motivate the entire universe. Now, I'm not saying that people aren't capable of something greater than what they are right now with paranormal faculties, etc., which I will be able to explain in future videos as well, along these same magnetic line of force, harmonic frequency relationship principles of energy transmission, which are ever about us, vibrating throughout the universe. And it's just a matter of our consciousness, our awareness of those things being pulled into our conscious mind through attunement. Same thing as when you turn on a radio, and whatever the components of that radio are designed to decode, modulate, and transmit into the speaker system are therefore decoded as that specific thing. So you get the radio program that's being broadcast by the station. The same thing with ourselves. We are, in effect, a big receiver and broadcasting station. Our mind, which I've learned to be referred to as the psychic anatomy or the psychic body, is basically a facsimile of ourselves. All the experiences we've undergone in the past resonated in a harmonic formation into a higher frequency range, a higher dimension, a harmonic multiple of whatever the composite energy of our physical body and our past experiences assumes in this dimension. It's regenerated and therefore transmitted infinitely upwards and downwards, and then into our immediate conscious perspective is projected certain harmonic frequency relationships that are compatible to continuing our life as we exist now. Now, that being said, the being that we know of as God cannot possibly exist, because in order to sustain all of the ideas and concepts that we each have in our own minds, the motivating principles behind how atoms are structured and how they propagate themselves, how they interact with each other, the polarity patterns of frequency relationship and regeneration, everything that we have ever quote-unquote created, such as technology, scientific equipment, instruments, any sort of observable phenomenon, temples, churches, books, printing presses, I could label anything you want in the entire universe, but those things in and of themselves being a part of this universe, therefore abide by those same harmonic principles and are a conglomeration of those waveforms, and in a more abstract sense, outside of the bounds of our traditionally accepted conscious knowledge of those things, exist as a specific oscillating vibration or combination of vibrations in the infinite. And therefore, that God being that a lot of people assume to exist in the context of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, etc., could not be an individual like ourselves, because in becoming an individual, it would therefore assume proportions of a specific set of things within that infinite, and therefore would not be able to also have been instrumental in creating those principles in the first place. Therefore, those things, as abstract energy formations existing as the form of God, would not be infinite and would not be capable of maintaining a harmonic attunement in sustaining and motivating the entire universe instantaneously, and would therefore be in much a position like ourselves, possessing a very limited scope of comprehension and possessing a very limited available knowledge of how to conduct himself or herself, and in doing so would not be considered an infinite being or a supreme being, could not possibly maintain a contact with everything simultaneously. In being a conscious entity like ourselves, having hands, having vocal cords, like he's depicted as having in the Bible, let there be light. Well, merely saying the words, let there be light, even for a sophisticated being, would not cause the universe to just come into existence instantaneously. We know the laws of cause and effect mean that there has to be some sort of thing to cause something to go into motion. That being said, delving back into the beginnings of the universe, one of the common theories is the Big Bang. There are others, like a steady state theory, which I could delve into at a later time. I won't do so at this moment, the specific reasons, to stay on track, at least for the most part. So those things in and of themselves, okay, well, if the universe came into existence at some point, the energy that is in the universe that composes all the atoms and all the motivating principles of how those things are able to exist as that form, much less ourselves or galaxies or and how those things orbit and interact with one another, those principles all must have a motivating force behind them as well. The principle of those atoms being able to interact with each other, that force that holds them together, and all the particles that vibrate amongst a nucleus, or the electrons, or the quarks that are composing the neutrons and protons, etc. I could enumerate many different examples that prove the validity of an infinite consciousness, an infinite impersonal force that sustains and motivates all of existence, but it is in no way a personal being such as people portray God to be in religion. I can say, let there be light, and through my physical body I can reach over and switch on or off the light. Okay, that doesn't mean that I created light and that it never existed before I did that. That doesn't mean that I personally was consciously responsible for the initiation of that light being emitted in the first place. It means that I possess, as a human being, a certain volume of knowledge or consciousness or awareness of certain principles of physics, which we have brought into existence through long trials and errors and many thousands of experiments and observations of the natural universe about us as we have evolved as a species. So therefore, we are able to concoct devices such as lamps, where we construct a very intricate mechanism and plug it into a power grid, and therefore are able to, and even the invention of the light bulb itself, I don't consider it to be an invention, since it exists as an energy wave matrix in some higher dimension anyway. But as far as our own consciousness is concerned, we brought that into realization at this time and place, and are able to manipulate certain parts of that principle of infinity to create a light. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that it didn't exist before in some form. We just brought different forms together into our own realization, and in doing so became a little bit more, quote, godlike in our ability to manipulate the physical universe. Certain laws and principles that are always in effect anyway, that we have just become aware of in fairly recent times. Now, touching more on the concept of God, which I will do in just a moment here.